Here's a lady to whine about gay marriage being protected by the law.
All right, today I want to talk about the Respect for Marriage Act, which fully repeals the Defense of Marriage Act, which defined legal marriage as between one man and one woman and was passed in 1996 and signed into law by Democrat President Bill Clinton. The House of Representatives just voted on this Respect for Marriage Act that codifies what is typically referred to as gay marriage.
This is what should have been done with Roe v. Wade when the Democrats had the votes to do so under Obama. But they felt a little too secure in thinking that the Supreme Court would never overturn it. Since they did, they're now passing this law in case Obergefell gets overturned, which would allow states to ban gay marriage again, which Judge Clarence Thomas says he thinks should happen.
So you will hear me say a few times so-called gay marriage or gay unions or quote-unquote gay marriage. Why do I say that? Well, because I am a Christian and therefore I believe, as many faiths have believed, that marriage was created by God. Therefore, it is defined by God in the beginning, pre-civilization, and he defines created marriage as between one man and one woman.
Where in the Bible is it defined as one man and one woman? Abraham had more than one wife, so did Solomon. God never said that they were doing anything wrong. If a prohibition against polygamous marriage is in the Bible, why do so many Christian and other Abrahamic denominations recognize polygamy as legitimate?
Therefore, all other forms of so-called marriage are actually illegitimate. They're not, by definition, marriages.
Not by the definition you use. You think that God invented marriage, when in reality, people invented it. And you believe that the definition you think God invented is the only one anybody should ever use.
They might be civil partnerships, they might be unions that are recognized by the state, that are recognized by the law as marriages, but because marriage actually precedes America and precedes civilization, we do not define marriage as anything other than between one man and one woman.
That's not how definitions work. The mere fact that a definition was coined before the United States was founded doesn't mean that the U.S. government cannot adopt a new definition.
I will probably use that phrase, gay marriage, throughout this because that's kind of the colloquial term and we kind of understand what I mean by that, but also know where I'm coming from and what my actual perspective is on that. So why are we even having a Respect for Marriage Act? Why is this going on? So we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about why I believe, as conservatives, we shouldn't support the codification of what is referred to as gay marriage.
If you don't think that what the government says is marriage has any relevance to its actual definition, then what difference does it make how the government defines it? I know conservatives like to scaremonger about religious institutions being forced to host gay weddings against their will, but the Respect for Marriage Act explicitly precludes any such thing.
And then, of course, as Christians, but also just from a general, secular, nonpartisan perspective, why it's important to maintain and to protect the legitimate traditional definition of marriage as between a man and a woman. I very much understand that this is a controversial position, whether you're on the left or the right. I understand that I am out of step with the mainstream here, but I mean, that's typical of most of my views. I simply believe what Christians have believed about marriage for thousands of years, what Jews believed about marriage for thousands of years before that.
Abraham was a Jew. In fact, he was the first Jew, and he never believed that marriage is between one man and only one woman.
What, by common grace, all civilizations, all societies, all nations for all of time have believed about marriage.
Well, that's not true. She makes it sound as though not a single gay marriage was recognized as legitimate until the 21st century. This is not the case. Lots of indigenous societies have long recognized same-sex marriages as legitimate.
And that is that it is between man and a woman for the purposes of procreation.
If it's for the purpose of procreation, why have we always granted marriage licenses to postmenopausal women? Why bother recognizing such a marriage given that it falls outside the supposed purpose of marriage?
So even though my position on this seems radical to us, the reality is the vast majority of even Americans believed what I did just 20 years ago. The majority of Americans, as we'll talk about in a little bit, believed that marriage was between a man and a woman even just 12 years ago.
The vast majority of Americans believed Pluto was a planet just 20 years ago. So what? Lots of people believed it in the recent past is not a very strong argument for anything.
So I may be out of step with where we are today. I am not out of step with most of human history and even most of the world today when it comes to the definition and this perspective on marriage.
Do you know what an argument ad populum is?
So, why are we even having this conversation? Why are politicians having this conversation when Obergefell passed in 2015 saying the marriage of same-sex couples was a constitutional right?
Because when Roe v. Wade was overturned, Clarence Thomas said he wanted to overturn Obergefell as well.
Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said this, quote, "This legislation guarantees that no married couple can be denied equal protection under federal law. This is really very important," she says, "from tax provisions to Social Security benefits and more, even if the court were to erase marriage freedom, God forbid." So there are probably two reasons why Democrats are pushing this right now. You might think it's kind of random.
Why would I think it's random, given what just happened to Roe v. Wade?
One, they may legitimately think that the Supreme Court will overturn Obergefell, which, as I just mentioned, declared marriage between two men or two women a constitutional right.
Given what happened to Roe v. Wade, Democrats not only may believe that Obergefell is in danger of being overturned, they most likely believe that. Why wouldn't they?
That could be one reason, because of what Justice Thomas said in his concurring opinion on Dobbs. Now, Justice Alito, who wrote the majority opinion for Dobbs, which was the decision that overturned Roe at the end of June, explicitly said that the decision to declare abortion not a constitutional right should not be interpreted as calling into question other decisions like those on birth control or same-sex unions. But Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, said this, quote, "We should reconsider all of the court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell." Griswold guaranteed the right of married couples to obtain birth control. Lawrence ruled anti-sodomy laws unconstitutional. Now, Thomas is not saying in his concurring opinion whether he agrees morally with birth control or sodomy or gay unions. He's not even saying that these things shouldn't be legal. That's not what he's arguing in his opinion.
That's irrelevant given that he's not a legislator. He's not in a position to pass such laws even if he did want them. That's not the issue. The issue is that he thinks that the legislators who do want to pass such laws should be allowed to. He thinks the government should be allowed to dictate to people what holes they're not allowed to use when they're doing it. He thinks the government should be allowed to lock people up for using birth control.
He is disagreeing with the court's idea of substantive due process, which served as the basis for not just these three cases, but also for Roe.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Substantive due process is the principle that certain rights have protection from tyranny of the majority.
So you can go back, you can listen to episode 633 of Relatable, where I explain more about his reasoning. We'll link it in the description of this episode. So perhaps Democrats are truly, sincerely trying to preempt a Supreme Court decision overturning Obergefell, which is incredibly unlikely to happen.
Yeah, that's what folks kept saying about Roe v. Wade. I think it's best that Democrats not make that mistake again. Also, if you think it's unlikely to happen, then it's unlikely that this law will need to be enforced. Given that this is the case, what are you complaining about?
Now, maybe in 50 years, like what happened with Roe v. Wade, but not anytime soon.
It's best to take the opportunity to protect marriage while the opportunity exists. When it passed, there were a few Republicans willing to vote for it. We don't know how long that will be the case.
But perhaps that's their motivation. But here's another likely reason, and that is to make Republicans vote on it before the midterms in November. Democrats want to show that the entire movement, or they want to try to prove that the entire movement that conservatives have been forging against gender identity indoctrination in schools and drag queen story hour and men and girls bathrooms are really just hating the gays. That's what they want everyone to think.
Even if they didn't do the transphobic stuff, there would still be Republicans who are clearly hostile to gay rights. Getting them on record about their position on the matter is worth doing regardless of their hostility toward trans people.
And that conservatives are in cahoots or are a part of, this far-right movement along with the Supreme Court to control people and to establish a Christian nationalist fascist theocracy. Their buzzword
You say their buzzword as though there aren't any conservatives using those words to describe exactly what they want.
As usual, when Democrats use this word freedom in their ads and in their tweets, this is their buzzword going into the midterms, they actually mean the exact opposite of what they say.
So when Nancy Pelosi said she wants to protect marriage freedom, she actually wants to ban marriage?
So when they say freedom, they mean tyranny. When they say democracy, they mean authoritarianism that they like. When they say authoritarianism, they mean democracy that they don't like. And the Dobbs decision is a great example of that. The Obergefell decision is a great example of that. So the Dobbs decision said, this decision should be placed in the hands of the people.
I don't think you understand how rights work. The whole point of having constitutional rights is to protect individuals and minorities from the whims of the majority. If a majority of Americans voted to start taxing churches, would you say, well, that's what Americans have democratically decided that they want, so I guess churches should pay taxes now? Or would you like the First Amendment to protect churches from what the majority wants?
Of the states should be decided democratically. And the left is calling that authoritarianism, Handmaid's Tale, far-right fascist extremism, when in reality, the Roe decision was far more authoritarian, banning states from, and their voters from banning abortion if they wanted to.
It's authoritarian because they took away our authority.
But the left's vision of democracy is actually where all of their wishes are pushed through into dissent, is silence. That's why they support Obergefell, even though Obergefell was undemocratic. The decision of marriage should have been left to the states. It should have been decided democratically.
Why? Why should the majority be allowed to dictate to individuals which consenting person they're allowed to marry? It's a clear violation of the Equal Protection Clause. If a law says that a woman can marry a man, but a man cannot, that's unambiguous sex discrimination. Some argue that such laws actually treat the sexes the same because they say to both sexes that they can only marry the opposite sex. But that's the same argument that was used to defend laws against interracial marriage. Some people said they're not racially discriminatory because all races are equally told that they can only marry within their race. Does this lady think whether interracial marriage is allowed should also be left to the states to decide democratically? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.